Taylor Elwood here with Sovereign Submission. And today I am going to be talking about abandoning yourself and how that abandons the relationship. So it's kind of an interesting thing. One of the challenges that I think a lot of men face is that they are inclined to, try and keep the peace by going along to get along. I've certainly been that man. I used to be a nice guy. And one of the things that I discovered is that being a nice guy really wasn't all that nice for me or for anyone else. In fact, it came at a high cost in terms of the overall relationships that I was in, because essentially I was abandoning myself. And what I didn't realize also is that I was abandoning the relationship. Welcome, Sheena. Glad to have you here. So today I want to talk about that. Now, next week I have a training on or speak so she can feel you. And I'm going to talk a bit about that later on in the video here, but this is essentially part of what we're talking about. Like, what happens when men abandon themselves in order to quote unquote be in a relationship? I mean, look at the concept of abandoning. What does it even mean? A lot of times what I see in regards to men abandoning themselves is that they will give away their own sovereign desires, their own sovereignty around what's important to them at the expense of themselves. And it comes at a very quiet but deadly cost to the relationship. For example, for a long time, I gave away my desire to go out and dance at night. In my second relationship, my second marriage, I didn't go out dancing most of the time. I think except at the very beginning. But I like going out dancing. I like going to clubs. I don't go all the time, but when I wanna go out and dance, I wanna go out and dance, and it doesn't matter to me whether I am with somebody or not with somebody. I just wanna go and dance. I'm not there to try and pick somebody up or do anything along those lines. I just wanna have some fun. For a long time, I abandoned myself in that way. I let go of that particular experience for most of 10 years of being in that relationship. And that might not seem like a big deal. Okay, like, you didn't go out dancing, like, you stayed at home. Why is that such a big deal? Well, here's why it's a big deal. Because by not standing up for something that I really wanted and saying, "This is important to me," I was also abandoning the relationship. I was checking out of that relationship. Sure, I didn't go out dancing because I wanted to keep the peace, because I didn't wanna get into a conversation, you know, around the insecurity that my ex-wife was inevitably going to express at the idea of me going out dancing, because chances were that I was gonna be going out alone because she would be too tired or just not really into it. And, you know, what I didn't do is I didn't say, like, "Look, I'm capable of going out and doing this. This isn't going to threaten our relationship." Instead, I gave it away. Giving that away, what I essentially did is I gave away an important piece of my joy. And giving that away created a quiet kind of resentment that infected the relationship. It poisoned it. And this is what I see happen for a lot of just people in general. It's not even just men. I mean, because really, we have nice guys and we have good girls, right? We have people who basically end up abandoning something that's important to them in order to please the other person. But here's the counterintuitive truth. When we give up something that's important to us to please somebody else, it actually hurts the relationship. What I mean by that is that that person can feel when you are not 100% dialed in and connected. I've seen this happen in my own relationships. I've also seen it happen in other relationships where the person has basically said, "Yeah, I'm just gonna go along to get along. I'm not gonna speak up. I'm gonna avoid having the conversation." And they start to check out. And the other person feels that and they know something's off, but neither person is really willing to speak to what is they're not willing to speak to the elephant in the room. They're not willing to speak to that quiet tension that has suddenly become so much louder than anything they could say. When I got out of that marriage, one of the first realizations that I had was like, man, I really miss dancing. And it's not that I didn't have that awareness while I was married. I did at different times think about it. But a lot of the time, I didn't really speak up for it. And so I just kind of buried it in me. Well, once I stopped doing that, once I stopped recognizing, like, okay, here's the ways that I've abandoned myself in the past, and I started to seize kind of like what was important to me, that's when I started to make it a point to go and do activities. But one of the promises that I made myself is I am never again going to give away something that's important to me. Now, I wish I could tell you that I succeeded in that particular promise, but I can safely say that there have been times, even since that marriage, where I ended up abandoning myself in order to try and make a relationship work. And let me be very clear here, and I think this is really important. Like, there is something to be said for the fact that any relationship needs some level of care and maintenance, and sometimes needs some work. Like, let's say that you're in a situation where you're like, "Hey, I want to go," and your sweetheart says, "You know what? I'd really like to go and do that activity with you. I'm not feeling well. You know, like I'd like to be with you though for that." There is something to be said for saying, "Okay, I can compromise a little bit here and maybe wait on doing that activity another time." Occasionally, that's good. If that became the norm, though, that's when it becomes a real problem because essentially at that point, you're abandoning yourself to never go and do that activity. Welcome, Bob. Glad to have you here. And Bob and Sheena, if either of you have questions or comments, feel free to drop those below as we continue this. So for me, I will say this. I didn't give up dancing after I got into subsequent relationships. I did keep to that. I would go out and go dancing whether I was with somebody or not, because for me, that was an important activity. And I remember that at one point, one of the people I was dating commented on the fact that I was going out dancing. And she was like, I see that you're going out dancing a lot. And I said, yeah, I'm going out dancing. This is really important to me. I didn't apologize for it. I didn't give it away. So I got better at not giving away certain things. But I also realized that like when you get better at identifying like the things that you don't you're not gonna give away, that's when things become more subtle. So it's really important to continue paying attention to that. Whether you're a nice guy, whether you're a good girl, it's important to pay attention to these subtle cues and attentions about the things that we are giving away. Because when we abandon ourselves, we are abandoning the relationship at the end of the day. And here's the truth. In order to be in relationship with somebody else or with multiple somebodies, if that's your thing, you have to first of all be in relationship with yourself. You have to be willing to speak up for your relationship. You have to be willing to set some boundaries and limits and speak up for what's really important for you. Because if you don't do that, nobody else is going to do it for you. This is a simple truth and a reality. I think a lot of people gloss over or ignore. And when we give away that sovereignty of ourselves, we are giving away something essential. Now, as we all know, if you're following on here, you know that this is sovereign submission. So, on the one hand, somebody who's submissive might say, "Well, wait a minute, Taylor. As a submissive, I want to orient myself in service toward this other person. I want to surrender to them. I want to give over control." And yes, that can be an important part of the dynamic, but it should never come at the cost of your own personhood or your own sense of what's important to you. As an example, I go and I practice martial arts 3 days a week. If I was involved with somebody who said to me, "You can't do martial arts," I'd be like, "I'm sorry, that's a problem right there. I'm gonna go do martial arts." Like, that's really important to me. That is a deep part of my discipline and my practice, and it is part of what actually leads me deeper into submission. Why would I give that away? I'm not gonna abandon myself for that. I'm not gonna abandon my sovereign expression of that, because that sovereign expression is actually what leads me deeper into surrender. It leads me deeper into relationship. It creates part of the erotic flow and the juice that is so important. It's the same thing with dance. And I'm not saying that this should ever come to the point where it's like, okay, I'm just going to go do my own thing. And yeah, tough. That's your problem. You have to deal with it. That's not what I'm talking about. With any relationship, there needs to be some understanding of like what is going to help make this relationship safe, what's going to create safety. But what doesn't create safety is not having the conversations. It's not speaking up for what's really important. So, like next week, we're going to be doing Speak So She Can Feel You. And the whole point of this training is that it's designed to really teach you the skills for how to be able to speak up for what you want. Because if you're abandoning yourself all the time, you're not going to be able to effectively be in a relationship. If you're giving away what's important to you because you're trying to avoid having those hard conversations, you're actually making those conversations harder, and you're essentially abandoning the relationship. I'm going to post a link here to Speak So She Can Feel. If you're interested, you can check it out. Really, what we're learning is we're learning that embodied training of how to get into our bodies, like when we have a hard conversation, when we speak up for something that's important to us. And I'm going to share an example. This is a really good example. It wasn't with a romantic partner, but shortly shortly after I had somebody move in with me, I had noticed that he tended to keep the lights on. And I remember I was like, it was early in the morning. I was getting up, I was exercising, and I'm like, he's leaving the lights on. I can turn them on. I can turn them off myself, but I don't really like that. I need to speak up for this. And I had this debate. This wasn't even somebody I was involved with romantically, but there was that part of me that felt so scared to speak up for what I wanted. What I did is I took a moment, I took a deep breath, and I got into my body and I found where I was feeling weak. I was feeling weak in my power area. That's kind of like in the belly, the solar plexus. And so what I did is I just allowed myself to go deep into there. And I said, what's the worst that can possibly happen here? And so when the roommate came home, I said to him, "Hey, I've noticed that you've been leaving lights on, and I'd like it if you could turn those off, because when you leave them on, that means that we're paying more for the electricity, utilities, and also I just like to, if you're not here, I want them to be turned off." He said, "Okay, I can take care of that." There was no big eruption, there was no big fight. There was just a simple understanding and an agreement was made. What would have happened if I hadn't done that? I would have resented him. I would have been upset. I would have felt frustrated, and I would have allowed it to silence my voice. How often do we silence our voices at the expense of our sovereignty, and it ends up costing us the relationship? Now, to be clear, hard conversations aren't easy. I mean, there's a reason I put that word hard before a conversation. Like when you speak up for something that's important to you, where you know that there may be some conflict, there is going to be that feeling of fear. And that kind of, there's going to be the what if, like, what if this person does this? What if this person does that? And the answer is that you don't know what that person's going to do. What you're really doing at that point is having a conversation with the projection of that person. Think about that. The projection of the person, not the actual person. Welcome, James. Glad to have you here. So, if I have a projection of a person that I'm having a conversation with, then I am not having a real conversation. I'm having a conversation with the person I imagine in my head. Well, let's be honest here. When we have conversations with the people the projections in our head, of course going to go to the worst case scenario because what have we been oriented toward? We've been oriented towards survival. Well, survival says I have to anticipate every single thing that could go wrong. I have to plan for it. I have to do whatever I can. I have to make sure that I'm safe. And this is part of what leads to abandonment. We abandon ourselves because we're afraid that if we rock the boat, that person's going to leave us. The irony of it all here is that by abandoning ourselves, by not speaking up for what we want, we are actually abandoning that relationship and that person, and we're abandoning ourselves. We're doing all the work for them. It's kind of funny. I was reading something where it was the other day. I was in this book, and essentially what the author said is that it is harder to avoid doing the work than it is to actually do the work. Let that land with you for a moment. It's harder to avoid doing the work. It seems like it would be easier, right? Like it seems like we would be safer if we just didn't have that hard conversation and speak up for something that we really wanted, needed, or desired. Yet the irony of it is that it is actually harder to avoid those conversations than it is to have them. Because while we seem like we're safe, we're really not. The relationship is slowly getting poisoned. And whether that relationship is with a roommate, it's with a friend, it's with your lover, your parents, your kids, or your boss, or whoever, as long as there is hidden tension there, that tension will define the relationship. This is one of the reasons why it's really important to recognize that the conversations we don't have are the conversations that create the relationship. I would rather have a hard conversation with somebody because I know that I can trust in myself, in representing myself, and that I can trust that person. And if the relationship is really going to end because of that hard conversation, that probably says right there that neither person was fully committed, or at least one of them wasn't. If we're fully committed, yes, there may be some raised voices. There may be some moments where we feel really uncomfortable. And guess what? We get the chance to repair. We get to come through together. We get the chance. We get the opportunity because we're operating in our sovereignty. And by operating in our sovereignty, we are able to more fully show up in relationship, regardless of what kind of dynamic you have. Welcome, Thomas. Glad to have you here. And again, if any of you have questions or comments about what I'm sharing here, feel free to drop those in. I'm always happy to respond to them. I think that really the most important thing that I see, and this is really for any nice guy, is like look at like what the cost of that abandonment is. The cost of the abandonment is a breakup or a divorce, loss of respect for yourself, loss of joy in doing the things that you want to do in life. Most importantly, it is the loss of your integrity. It is the loss of your integrity. When we are not fully aligned in truth with ourselves, we cannot be aligned in truth with anyone else. Now, if you're interested, I'm going to put the link in here again. This is for my class that's coming up this coming Thursday, called Speak So She Can Feel You. And in this class, what you're going to be learning are that you're going to basically get the training, the skills for how to stay in your body and have the hard conversations so that you can come out the other side okay. Why is that so important? When we come out the other side okay, we know that we are in contact with that person. We know we're in contact with ourselves. We know that we can get through a rough time and still stay together. And that's essentially really what we need to know. And I want to be very clear, I'm not saying go and intentionally create rough situations in your relationship just to see if the person's going to stay with you. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying, though, is that at the same time, we need to speak up for what's really important to us. We need to honor who we are for ourselves and for that other person and for the relationship overall. And if we don't do that, that relationship will end. It might not end right away, but it will end. So, something I found in some of the studies that I explored and researched and read up on was that, you know, uh, people who had a lot of conflict in relationships, but where they didn't like really respect each other, usually that relationship ended within the first 5 years. People who didn't have the conversations, but there was still that quiet underlying sense of relationship, that relationship could last for over 10 years. And guess what? It would still end. It would still end. The relationships that last the longest are the relationships where people are willing to have the conversations and where they come out and they come out loving each other more. People say relationships are hard. I disagree with that. I don't think the relationships are hard. What's hard is what we avoid. What's hard is what we don't speak up for. What's hard is all the ways that we abandon ourselves. If if speaking up for something is going to cause us to lose a relationship, then that relationship was never going to last anyway. That sounds harsh, but it's real. To truly be in relationship with somebody is to be willing to speak up for what is truly important. It doesn't mean that you're always going to get what you want. It doesn't mean that things will automatically happen a certain way or another way. But what it does mean is that you can respect yourself and that you can say, okay, this is what's going on. And it means that both of you or more, if you're with more than one person, can hold that container and hold that relationship and give it the care and love it deserves. And as a result, be able to care and love for each other. And if that's something you really want, if that's something you want to get better at, whether you're single right now or you're in a relationship, then this is one of those skills that you want to learn because you're going to have hard conversations. There's no way that you're ever going to be in a relationship where there's not going to be some discomfort, where there's not going to be some tension. But what you do with that discomfort and tension is what actually defines the relationship. So I leave you with this final question, which is, do you want to be in a relationship where you never have the conversation and you abandon yourself? Or do you want to be in a relationship where you have the conversation and you come out the other side respecting yourself and respecting her because you know that the two of you can hold it together and that you are actually in closer contact? I know which one I prefer, and that's the relationship that I'm living in now, both with myself and with my mistress and with all the other people that I'm happy to share my life with, because I don't it's this isn't even in just romantic relationships. This isn't any kind of relationship. This is with friendships. It's with any type of relationship. We speak up for what we really want and we trust it. All right. Thank you so much for joining us here. Yeah, I appreciate it. And if you're interested in the class, definitely check it out. I will also have a link in the show notes below for any of you who are watching it later, or if you're watching it on YouTube. And I'd love to see some of you there because this is a great opportunity to learn these skills and come out the other side a more grounded and present man who can hold his own in the relationship and as a result, be able to hold the relationship.